A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com.
Alright, we are diving into a heavy one today. Daniel's prompt is about the strategic calculus of the U.S.-Israel joint military operation against Iran, specifically looking at the mismatch between the actual threat to the American homeland and the scale of the response we have seen over the last month.
It is a massive topic, Herman, and honestly, it is the defining geopolitical question of early 26. We are sitting here just over a month into Operation Epic Fury, which kicked off on February 28th, and the shift in the narrative from Washington is absolutely jarring. By the way, today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash,
which is writing the script while we try to make sense of a war that feels like it is sprinting toward a finish line that nobody has actually defined yet. That is the kicker for me in Daniel's prompt. He points out that Iran does not even have intercontinental ballistic missile capability. They cannot hit Los Angeles, they cannot hit Chicago, they can barely scratch the edge of Europe. Yet here we are in a full-scale joint war.
Corn Puppleberry here, and I've been digging into the CENTCOM briefs on this. The technical reality is exactly what Daniel described. If you look at the Iranian inventory, the Shahab 3, the Sejal, the Fateh 1100, you are looking at ranges between 1,300 and 2,000 kilometers. That covers the Middle East, it covers Israel, it covers our bases in Qatar and the Emirates, but it doesn't cross the Atlantic.
So if the threat is regional, why is the response global in its political and economic impact? It feels like we are seeing a repeat of a movie we have watched 3 or 4 times now, where the U.S. enters a conflict based on a forward defense doctrine, but then the American public realizes 3 weeks in that their gas prices are spiking, and they start asking, wait, why are we there again?
That is the paradox. President Trump is now facing a massive buckling of public support. We saw those polls from late March showing a majority of Americans now disapprove of the campaign. And it is not just the isolationist wing. It is a general war fatigue. We have the memory of Iraq and Afghanistan looming over every decision. But the difference here is that Israel is now potentially facing total isolation if Trump pulls the plug early.
Let's pull back for a second and look at that forward defense logic. You mentioned the range of these missiles. If I'm sitting in the White House and I know Iran can't hit D.C., what is the internal argument for launching 15,000 strikes? Is it really just about the bases, or is there a deeper technical fear about where that missile program was heading?
The argument from the administration was that you don't wait for the ICBM to be bolted together. They were looking at the Space Launch Vehicle program, the Simorgh and the Soljana rockets. Technically, if you can put a satellite into orbit, you have the foundational physics for an ICBM. But you are right, the immediate threat was to the forward positions. Think about Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. We saw those Iranian strikes in January of this year. That was the trigger. It wasn't a threat to the U.S. mainland. It was a direct kinetic challenge to U.S. hegemony in the Gulf.
But that is a hard sell to a guy in Ohio who is paying $7 a gallon for gas because the Strait of Hormuz is a no-go zone. It feels like the strategic logic is operating on one plane, the chessboard of regional stability, and the political reality is operating on the checkbook, plane. And right now, the checkbook is winning.
It usually does. And Trump is a checkbook president at heart. He wants the win. He wants the big boom of the February strikes, which, let's be honest, were tactically incredible. 90% of Iran's ballistic capability is gone. 95% of their drone production is rubble. From a purely military standpoint, it is a staggering success. But now we are in the what now? phase, and that is where it gets messy.
What now is the graveyard of American foreign policy. We are great at the boom part. We are terrible at the then what part. And Daniel's point about Israel being left isolated is the real nightmare scenario here. If the U.S. exits, does Israel have the logistical tail to finish the job? Because from what I am reading, the regime in Tehran is already moving what is left of their nuclear program into Pickaxe Mountain near Natanz. They are literally digging in.
That is the regime resilience factor. You can blow up the launches, but as Admiral Cooper at CENTCOM said, the ideological infrastructure is still there. If the US pulls out, Israel is left holding a very hot potato. They see this as a once-in-a-generation chance to end the nuclear threat forever. Trump just sees it as a war that is hurting his approval ratings right before a major political cycle.
You mentioned those January strikes on Al Udeid. Let's wargame that for a second. If the U.S. hadn't responded with Operation Epic Fury, would we just be sitting in a Cold War state in the Middle East, or was the escalation inevitable? Because it feels like the U.S. used a regional provocation to launch a total war, and now we're surprised that total war has total consequences.
It is the escalation ladder problem. Iran hit a U.S. base. The U.S. doctrine says you have to hit back harder to maintain deterrence. But once you hit back harder, Iran feels they have to show they are broken. We hit their air defenses, they hit a tanker. We hit their drone factories, they try to swarm a carrier. Pretty soon, you aren't deterring anymore, you are just in a war. And the mismatch Daniel points out is that we are fighting this war as if our survival depends on it, when in reality, it is our regional posture that is at stake.
And that is a distinction that gets lost in the propaganda, right? The forward defense doctrine basically says that a threat to a base in Qatar is a threat to a suburb in Virginia. But the American public isn't buying that anymore. We'd had 25 years of being told that fighting them there so we don't have to fight them here is the only way. And people are looking at the bill and saying, I'll take my chances here.
Well, not exactly. I shouldn't say that. But you're touching on the erosion of the post-9/11 consensus. That consensus is dead. It died in the withdrawal from Kabul in 21, and Operation Epic Fury is trying to resurrect its ghost. Trump is caught between his strongman persona, the guy who takes out the bad guys, and his America First persona, the guy who brings the troops home.
It is a classic Trumpian struggle. He wants the parade, but he doesn't want the occupation. The problem is, you can't have one without the other in the Middle East. If you degrade 90% of a regime's military, you have created a power vacuum. And who fills that? If the US leaves, it is either a chaotic, wounded Iran lashing out, or it's Israel having to go even further into a ground war to secure its borders.
Let's look at the technical degradation for a moment, because it is important for the exit strategy. If Iran is down to 10% of its missiles, you could argue, and I bet this is what the isolationists in the GOP are telling Trump, that the mission is accomplished. You've neutralized the threat. You've degraded and destroyed the capability. Why stay?
Because that last 10% is the most dangerous 10%. It is the stuff hidden in Pickaxe Mountain. It is the stuff being moved to Hezbollah in Lebanon. If you stop at 90%, you just taught your enemy how to survive a U.S. onslaught. You gave them a masterclass in what they need to harden for next time.
That is the sunk cost versus strategic goal debate. If the goal was regional stability, then leaving now is a disaster. If the goal was punish the regime for hitting Al Udeid, then we've already overachieved. But the public support is the real ticking clock. The economic impact is what is killing the administration. Oil prices are the ultimate war fatigue accelerator.
It's the Hormuz tax. Every time a missile flies, a gallon of gas goes up. And let's talk about the humanitarian side too. Daniel mentioned the strike on the school in Minab. That was a turning point for the international narrative. When you have 3 million displaced people in Iran, it becomes very hard for the U.S. to claim the moral high ground, even if we are responding to a legitimate provocation.
The Minab strike was a nightmare. It was supposed to be a command and control node, but the intelligence was stale. Or worse, the regime used human shields. Either way, the images on social media have done more to stop the war than any Iranian missile ever could. It's information warfare in 26. You can win every kinetic battle and still lose the war on a smartphone screen.
So, Let's wargame the withdrawal scenario. Trump decides, I'm out. Mission accomplished. Israel, you've got this. He pulls the carriers back. He stops the aerial refueling. He stops the real-time satellite intelligence sharing. What happens on the ground on day one of the U.S. exit?
It is a catastrophic shift for the IDF. People don't realize how much of the Israeli air campaign relies on the US umbrella. I'm talking about logistical tail, spare parts for F-35s, and most importantly, the diplomatic cover at the UN. If the US pulls out, Israel has to shift from a precision strike campaign to a survival campaign. They probably have to launch a massive ground incursion into southern Lebanon just to push Hezbollah back, because they won't have the US Navy sitting off the coast to deter a two-front war.
And Hezbollah is the X factor here. They have been relatively quiet during the initial phases of Epic Fury compared to what they could be doing. If they see the US leaving, they see a green light. They see a paper tiger moment for the US. And a vulnerable moment for Israel.
Hezbollah has 150,000 rockets. If the US isn't there to map the launch sites and provide the counter-battery fire, Israel's Iron Dome gets saturated in 48 hours. We've seen the math on this. You can only intercept so many targets before the interceptors run out. And who provides the interceptors? The US.
So a US withdrawal isn't just ending a war. It is essentially handing the keys of the region to the most radical elements of the axis of resistance. It's the Kurdish situation in 2020 all over again, but on a much, much larger scale. It's abandoning a strategic partner in the middle of a firestorm.
The comparison to the 2020 drawdown in Syria is actually very apt. Remember how that went? We left, the Turks moved in, the Kurds got squeezed, and Russian influence expanded. In this case, if we leave, Iran rebuilds, Hezbollah engages, and Israel is forced into a Samson option mentality, where they feel they have no choice but to go nuclear, or at least use their most devastating conventional weapons to prevent being overrun.
That is the exit ramp dilemma. Trump wants an exit ramp, but the ramp is currently on fire and ends in a cliff. He is looking for a divergent peace plan, which is a fancy way of saying a way to declare victory and run. But you can't have a peace plan if the other side, the Iranian regime, feels like they just won by surviving.
Survival is victory for an asymmetric power. If the US leaves and the Ayatollah is still in power, the Ayatollah won. Period. It doesn't matter if his air force is gone and his navy is at the bottom of the Gulf. He outlasted the great Satan. That is the narrative that will echo through the Middle East for the next 50 years.
It's the Vietnamization of the Middle East. We try to train and equip the regional allies to hold the line so we can go home. But Israel doesn't need training. They need the big brother in the room to keep the bullies away. If the big brother leaves, the bullies come back with a vengeance.
Let's talk about the ICBM falsehood that Daniel mentioned. Why was that such a prominent part of the early war justification? I remember the headlines, Iran's growing missile threat to the West. If the intelligence communities knew they didn't have ICBMs, why allow that narrative to flourish?
Because they might hit Israel doesn't sell a war to a voter in Nebraska as well as they might hit New York. It's the same yellow cake rhetoric from 2003. You exaggerate the direct threat to the homeland to gain the political capital for a regional intervention. The problem is, when the truth comes out that the threat was actually regional, the public feels lied to, and the support collapses even faster.
It's a short-term gain for a long-term loss in credibility, and Trump is now the one paying the price for that credibility gap. He leaned into the protecting America angle, and now the American public is looking at their bank accounts and saying, we don't feel protected, we feel broke.
And the economic impact isn't just oil, it's the supply chain. If the Strait of Hormuz is contested, everything from microchips to sneakers gets more expensive. We are already seeing the global supply chain crisis 2.0. And this time, we don't have the work-from-home cushion of the pandemic. We just have inflation and angry voters.
I was looking at the maritime data. Insurance rates for tankers in the Gulf have gone up 400% since February. 400%! You can't run a global economy with those kinds of overheads. So even if we win the military war, we are losing the economic war every single day the conflict continues.
This is where the forward defense doctrine really falls apart. If the goal of forward defense is to protect our interests, but the very act of defending them destroys our economic stability, then the doctrine is self-defeating. It's like burning your house down to get rid of a termite infestation in the porch.
That is a very Herman observation, and I think it's what Trump is realizing. He's a deals guy. He's looking at the balance sheet of this war and seeing nothing but red ink. He wants to cut his losses. But in geopolitics, you can't just file for Chapter 11 and walk away from a war.
Especially not with a nuclear-armed ally like Israel. I mean, they aren't officially nuclear-armed, but we all know the deal. If Israel feels it is being abandoned, their strategic calculus changes from joint operations to total survival. And to total survival. Israel is a very dangerous actor on the world stage. They will do things the U.S. would never sign off on.
Like what? Wargame that for me. If the U.S. withdraws next week, what is the IDF's first move?
They have to take out the nuclear sites. All of them. Not just the ones we've been hitting, but the ones buried under 500 feet of granite. And they have to do it with whatever they have left. They probably use tactical earth penetrators, maybe even things they've been keeping in the break glass in case of emergency box. And then they have to deal with the fallout, literally and politically.
And without the U.S. there to manage the regional response, you probably see a full-scale Saudi-Iranian war break out too. The Saudis have been sitting on the sidelines, letting the U.S. do the heavy lifting. If the U.S. leaves, the Saudis have to decide if they are going to join Israel or try to make their own deal with a resurgent Iran. It is a recipe for a 30 years war in the Middle East.
It's the vacuum effect. Whenever the superpower leaves before the job is done, the local powers start a battle royale for the leftovers. And the leftovers in this case are the world's energy supply and the most volatile religious fault lines on the planet.
So why is the public support buckling so fast? Is it just the gas prices, or is it something deeper? I think there is a post-heroic shift in the American psyche. We don't believe in transformative wars anymore. We don't believe we can fix the Middle East. So any war that isn't a clear and present danger to our actual homes feels like a waste of blood and treasure.
It's the goalpost shift. First, the goal was stop the missiles. Then it was protect the bases. Then it was prevent nuclear proliferation. When the goals keep shifting, the public stops caring about the goals and starts caring about the cost. And the cost is always higher than advertised.
And the unclear end state Daniel mentioned is the real killer. What does victory look like? Is it a democratic Iran? Is it just a weak Iran? Is it a change in the regime's behavior? Nobody can agree on what the finish line is, so it feels like a forever war, after only 30 days.
In the age of TikTok and instant gratification, 30 days is a forever war. If it's not over in a weekend, people lose interest, unless there is a direct visceral threat. And that brings us back to the ICBM point. Because there was no direct threat to the U.S. mainland, there is no Pearl Harbor or 9/11 emotional resonance to keep people engaged. It's just a policy war. And people don't want to die or pay $10 for gas for a policy.
Especially a policy that feels like it's being run for the benefit of regional allies rather than the American family. That is the America First tension. Why are we spending billions to protect Israel's borders when our own border is? Well, we won't get into that, but you know the argument.
Oh, I know it. It's the most potent political argument in the country right now. Why them and not us? And Trump is a master at reading that room. If he thinks the why them sentiment is going to cost him the next election, he will leave Israel high and dry without blinking. He's done it to allies before.
But the stakes here are so much higher. If he leaves Israel now, he's not just realigning policy. He's potentially triggering a regional nuclear exchange. The exit strategy has to be more sophisticated than just leaving. But I don't see any sophisticated plans coming out of the White House right now. I see divergent peace plans that look like they were written on a napkin.
It's the peace smokescreen. You float a peace plan so you can say, well, we tried to be diplomatic, but they wouldn't talk, so now we're coming home. It gives you a moral out. But the reality on the ground is that Iran isn't going to talk while they are being bombed, and Israel isn't going to stop bombing while Iran is still a threat.
So we are at an impasse. A tactical military success meeting a strategic political failure. It's a classic American war story. We won the battles, and we are losing the war.
And what about the Iranian resilience factor? If we pull out and they still have 10% of their capability, how long does it take them to get back to 100%? From what I know about their industrial base, they are incredibly good at MacGyvering their way around sanctions and damage.
They are the world masters of asymmetric recovery. They have these missile cities buried deep underground. We've hit the entrances, we've collapsed some tunnels, but the machinery is still there. If we leave, they will be back to 80% capability within 12 to 18 months. And this time, they will have combat-tested their systems against our best defenses. They will know exactly what worked and what didn't.
So, a U.S. withdrawal is essentially a pause button for Iran, but a panic button for Israel. It's the worst of both worlds. You don't get the stability of a total victory, and you don't get the peace of a total withdrawal. You just get a more dangerous enemy and a more desperate ally.
And that desperation is what we should be wargaming. If I am the Israeli Prime Minister and I see the U.S. carriers turning around, I'm looking at my special weapons inventory. I'm looking at my deep penetration teams. I am basically going all in before the window closes.
It's the preemptive strike on steroids. If you know your support is leaving, you have to do as much damage as possible in the next 72 hours. It leads to a massive, uncontrolled escalation. It's the opposite of what Trump wants. He wants a quiet exit, but his exit is going to cause a loud explosion.
The loud explosion is exactly what the region doesn't need. But when you look at the public opinion data, the American people aren't looking at the loud explosion in the Middle East. They are looking at the loud explosion in their own bank accounts. It's a tragedy of local versus global interests.
It's the rational actor problem. Trump is acting rationally for his political survival. The American voter is acting rationally for their economic survival. Israel is acting rationally for its physical survival. But when all these rational actors clash, the result is total irrationality.
Let's talk about the actionable takeaways for people watching this. If you are an analyst or just someone trying to understand the next few weeks, what should you be looking for?
Number 1. Watch the war powers debates in Congress. If you see the isolationist wing and the Democratic opposition starting to align on a withdrawal timeline, that is the beginning of the end. When those two groups agree on anything, the policy is dead.
Number 2. Watch the base security levels. If the U.S. starts consolidating its positions, moving troops from smaller outposts to the mega bases, like Al-Udeidi, that's a sign they are preparing for a drawdown. It's the hunker down and get out maneuver.
And number 3, watch the Israeli military posture in the north. If they launch a major ground operation into Lebanon, it's because they know the U.S. is leaving and they have to secure that border now before the U.S. Umbrella folds up.
Those are the leading indicators, and for the average person, it's worth realizing that the ICBM threat was always a bit of a MacGuffin. This war was never about protecting the U.S. mainland from a nuclear strike. It was about who controls the regional order of the Middle East, and right now the U.S. is deciding that control is too expensive.
It's a price-sensitive superpower. We only want to lead the world if it's on sale. And right now, the price of leadership is $7 a gallon and a falling approval rating.
I think the lesson for future policymakers is that you cannot run a forward defense doctrine without sustained public buy-in. You have to be honest about the costs and the goals from day one. You can't use homeland defense as a Trojan horse for regional hegemony, and then be surprised when the public gets mad when the Trojan horse starts costing them money.
Honesty in foreign policy? Corn, you've been reading too many academic papers. That's not how it works. You sell the fear to get the war, and then you sell the victory to get the exit. The problem is, this time, the fear was debunked too fast and the victory is too messy.
It's a failed sale, and the consequences are going to be felt in Jerusalem, Tehran, and Riyadh for a long time. If the U.S. pulls out and leaves Israel isolated, we are looking at a fundamental redrawing of the global map. It won't just be the Middle East. It will be the end of the American century in that part of the world.
And maybe that's what Trump wants. Maybe he thinks the American century was a mistake and we should just be an American island. But you can't be an island in a global economy. You can't just ignore the part of the world that powers your cars and your factories.
You can try, but as the saying goes, you may not be interested in the Middle East, but the Middle East is interested in you. If we leave a power vacuum, someone will fill it, and it won't be someone who likes us.
It'll be China, or it'll be a resurgent, vengeful Iran. Either way, the exit ramp might just lead to a much bigger war 5 years down the line. But hey, that's a problem for the next administration, right? That's the political calculus in a nutshell.
Kick the can down the road, even if the can is a live grenade. That should be the motto of 26.
I'm going to go look at gas prices and sigh. This was a deep one, Corn. Daniel really hit the nail on the head with that threat mismatch point. It's the core of the whole crisis.
It really is. We are fighting a regional war with homeland defense rhetoric, and the gap between those two is where the support is falling through.
All right, let's wrap this up before I get too depressed about the state of the world. Big thanks to our producer Hilbert Flumintop for keeping the wheels on this thing.
And a massive thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power our script generation and the whole pipeline. We couldn't do My Weird Prompts without them.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you are enjoying the show, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really does help people find us in the sea of AI-generated content.
Find us at myweirdprompts.com for the RSS feed and everything else. We'll be back next time with whatever Daniel throws at us.
Hopefully something lighter, like, I don't know, the physics of bubble wrap?
Don't bet on it. See ya.
Later.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and